the Eleni High Council declared her a lost cause, a biological anomaly beyond their comprehension. Aurora, barely old enough to shed her first carapace, was fading fast. But Dr. Anthony Taylor, watching the readings from across the galaxy, saw something they didn't, a pattern he understood. Within the towering spires of the Eleni Senate, bathed in the cool, cerulean glow of bioluminescent flora, the High Council convened. Holographic projections flickered around the chamber, displaying complex genetic sequences and physiological readouts, all converging on a single, devastating conclusion. The anomaly is intractable, Counselor Xylia pronounced, her voice a synthesized whisper that echoed through the chamber. Her chitin synthesis is catastrophically unstable. We have exhausted all known treatments. Counselor Rel, his iridescent eyes reflecting the holographic data, nodded grimly. The prognosis is terminal. Further intervention is inadvisable. The decision, though unspoken, hung heavy in the air. Aurora's suffering was beyond their advanced, yet rigid medical capabilities. Meanwhile, in a sterile medical bay several decks below the Senate chamber, Aurora lay motionless. Her delicate, insectoid frame was frail, her exoskeleton visibly weakened and cracked in places, like dried earth after a long drought. Tubes snaked from her body, feeding her a cocktail of nutrients and suppressants, but her breathing remained shallow and labored. Her large, iridescent eyes, usually shimmering with youthful curiosity, were now clouded with fear and vulnerability, reflecting the cold, uncaring light of the medical monitors. Light years away, on the neutral space station of KDRER-7, Dr. Anthony Taylor sat hunched over a flickering monitor in his cluttered clinic. Empty nutrient paste packets littered his desk, alongside discarded circuit boards and half-disassembled diagnostic tools. The clinic, a converted storage container, was a far cry from the pristine facilities of the Eleni High Council. He received Aurora's medical file, a cascade of data transmitted across the vast gulf of space. He skimmed the High Council's prognosis, a flicker of defiance in his eyes. Terminal, huh? He muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Let's see about that. He saw a faint pattern in the data, a subtle rhythm in the chaos that piqued his interest. Anthony isolated a specific sequence of data in Aurora's genetic readout, magnifying it on his screen. The anomaly repeated, a broken chord in the symphony of her genome. He cross-referenced the sequence, comparing its structure to a human genome database. Interesting, he murmured, tracing the pattern with his finger. Very interesting. A memory flickered in his mind. A young girl, pale and weak, lying in a sterile hospital bed on Earth. He'd fought tirelessly to save her, but the disease, a rare genetic disorder involving collagen production, had ultimately claimed her life. The guilt still gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his limitations. He looked back at Aurora's data. While seemingly dissimilar, the root cause of her chitin instability might have an analog in that human disorder, a flaw in the very building blocks of life. Suddenly, a priority message flashed on his screen, the seal of the Eleni High Council emblazoned Dr. Ed across it. Dr. Taylor, a stern, synthesized voice boomed from the monitor. The High Council has become aware of your unauthorized investigation into the medical case of Aurora. We must insist that you cease your inquiries immediately. Human medicine is ill-equipped to address such complex genetic anomalies. Further interference will be viewed as a breach of interspecies medical protocols. Anthony ignored the warning, his expression resolute. He ran further simulations, pushing his outdated equipment to its limits. Hours blurred into a caffeine-fueled frenzy as he identified a potential enzyme deficiency in Aurora's cells, a deficiency directly linked to the genetic anomaly. Gotcha, he whispered, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He drafted a counter-proposal, a detailed analysis of Aurora's condition, and a potential treatment plan based on adapted human techniques. He requested permission to examine Aurora directly, to conduct further tests and confirm his diagnosis. He knew it was a long shot, but he had to try. The Eleni High Council convened once more, the holographic projection of Anthony's proposal hanging in the air. Counselor Xylia remained skeptical, her expression unreadable. His claims are audacious, she stated. Human medicine has a checkered history. Counselor Rell, however, saw a glimmer of hope in Anthony's unconventional approach. We have exhausted all our options, he argued. What harm can come from allowing him to examine her further? We can monitor him closely. Driven by desperation and a sliver of hope, the High Council granted Anthony limited access to Aurora under strict observation to conduct further tests. Days later, Anthony arrived at the Eleni medical facility, his worn medical bag slung over his shoulder. The sterile environment, the hushed tones of the Eleni medical staff, the sheer scale of the operation, it was all a stark contrast to his cramped clinic. He approached Aurora's bedside, his gaze softening as he took in her weakened state. He noted the subtle signs of her deteriorating condition, the faint tremor in her exoskeleton, the shallow rise and fall of her chest. His conviction hardened. Intervention was needed, and he was determined to provide it. I need specific medical samples, Anthony stated, his voice firm but respectful, and access to your diagnostic tools. I need to run some tests of my own. He watched the Eleni medical staff closely, gauging their willingness to cooperate, pushing the boundaries of their trust. He began his tests, immediately facing the daunting task of adapting his human medical techniques to Aurora's alien physiology. The Eleni equipment was complex, unfamiliar, and designed for a completely different biological system. He sighed, rolling up his sleeves. "All right, Aurora," he murmured, his voice filled with a quiet purpose. "Let's see what we can do." Differences can create amazing things. His fingers danced across the console, the hum of the makeshift server a constant drone in the cramped lab. Chitin synthesis. Disrupted enzyme production. The Eleni Council called it a biological dead end. I call it a puzzle. The holographic projection of the mutated gene shimmered before him, a tangled mess of code. He isolated the critical sequence, the one responsible for the errant protein. He found Aurora in the sterile medical bay, her iridescent eyes wide and anxious. "It's like, your body isn't building its shell properly, Aurora," he explained gently, kneeling beside her. He offered her a small, brightly colored data chip, a silly human cartoon loaded onto it. A distraction, a comfort. "We're going to try and fix that." The holographic conference flickered to life, the stern faces of the Eleni High Council staring down at him. "Dr. Taylor, we require immediate access to your findings," the lead counselor stated, her voice clipped and formal. "And furthermore, we must deny your request to access our genetic database. The risk of contamination is too great." "With all due respect, counselor," Anthony countered, "without access I'm working blind. I've found anomalies, potential errors in the annotation of the chitin synthesis gene. Errors that suggest misidentification of the specific gene that is broken." "Impossible," another counselor scoffed. "Our database is meticulously maintained." Anthony hesitated. "My research suggests otherwise. There are indications of inbreeding practices within certain Eleni bloodlines, practices that can lead to the propagation of genetic errors." A tense silence filled the comms channel. Finally, the lead counselor spoke. "We will grant limited access, doctor, but your search will be strictly monitored. Deviate from the approved parameters and access will be revoked." Days blurred into nights as Anthony sifted through the Eleni genetic data, the lab bathed in the blue glow of the monitors. Finally, he found it a section mislabeled, a sequence strikingly similar to human collagen disorders. Aha! A spark of triumph ignited within him. Same basic building blocks, different architecture. The Eleni exoskeleton, like human collagen, relies on precise protein folding. A single mutation throws everything off. He began experimenting, adapting existing human gene therapy techniques to Aurora's unique biology. His lab, already a chaotic collection of scavenged tech and repurposed equipment, became even more cluttered with alien cell cultures and improvised bioreactors. Syringes and tubes littered every surface. He cultured Aurora's cells, introducing modified viral vectors carrying corrected genetic code. Under the microscope, he watched with suspenseful pause as the cells began to produce chitin, faint shimmering crystals forming within their membranes. Promising, but he also observed signs of cellular stress, potential for an immune overreaction. He presented his findings to the High Council, holographic simulations showcasing the potential of CRISPR gene editing to precisely correct the mutation. This isn't some blunt instrument, counselors, he argued. CRISPR allows us to target the specific error, to rewrite the code with surgical precision. A new voice spoke, Counselor Vela, her expression troubled. Doctor, the ethical implications of altering Eleni genetics with human technology are profound. What unforeseen consequences might arise? Counselor, the consequence of inaction is certain death for Aurora, Anthony retorted, his voice firm. CRISPR in its modern form is incredibly precise. We're not rewriting her entire genome, just correcting a single critical error. I'm not trying to alter her, I'm trying to save her life. He activated another simulation, showcasing the corrected cells thriving, chitin production restored to normal levels. The High Council deliberated, their faces etched with concern. Finally, the lead counselor spoke. We require further assurances, Doctor. Strict conditions will be imposed. Constant monitoring. The presence of our own medical experts. This trial will proceed only under our direct supervision. Anthony tightened fists. The conditions were onerous, bordering on impossible given his limited resources. But Aurora, he looked at the holographic image of the young Eleni, her iridescent eyes filled with a fragile hope. Agreed, he said, his voice tight. I agree to your conditions. He began preparations, modifying his equipment, scaling down the CRISPR delivery system to accommodate Aurora's small size and fragile condition. Every wire, every connection had to be perfect. Resources were stretched to their breaking point. Aurora watched him work, her voice soft. You really think you can fix me, Dr. Taylor? He met her gaze, his own filled with a fierce perseverance. I'm going to try my damnedest, Aurora. You have my word. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. A flicker of memory, a sterile operating room, a desperate struggle. A young human patient, his face pale, his life slipping away despite Anthony's best efforts. I won't fail again. He transmitted the detailed treatment plan to the Eleni High Council, a complex document filled with technical jargon and precise timings. But buried within the data stream, subtly altered, were a few key parameters. A slight adjustment to the enzyme inhibitors, a minor tweak to the viral vector concentration. Flexibilities he would need, room to maneuver when the inevitable complications arose. The council would never notice, not unless they knew exactly what to look for. The comms panel beeped, the lead counselor's voice echoing through the lab. Dr. Taylor, the High Council has approved the CRISPR treatment to begin, under the specified conditions. We will see if human medicine is worthy of our trust. Anthony initiated the CRISPR treatment, the faint hum of the gene editing apparatus filling the small clinic. He watched Aurora's vital signs displayed on a holographic screen, each line a testament to her fragile state. The Eleni monitors, their iridescent eyes unblinking, observed every twitch, every fluctuation. Then it happened. A rash bloomed across Aurora's delicate exoskeleton, spreading like crimson algae on a pale reef. Her breathing hitched, a series of rapid clicks and whistles that spoke of distress. Stop the infusion, Anthony barked, already reaching for a pre-filled syringe of general antihistamine. He plunged the needle into a port on her arm, his movements precise and swift. Epinephrine, stat. He called to his overworked medical AI. The antihistamine did little to quell the reaction. Aurora's carapace began to swell, constricting her movements. Her respiratory clicks grew frantic, desperate. The holographic readouts painted a grim picture, dropping oxygen saturation, rising intercarapace pressure. The Aleni High Council, their projections shimmering with disapproval, watched with growing unease. Human medicine, one of them, Counselor Valerius, said, his voice a low thrum, proves itself fallible once more. An Aleni medical expert, a slender figure named Lyra, stepped forward. Counselor, perhaps a return to traditional Aleni methods would be prudent. We have techniques to stabilize the exoskeleton, alleviate the pressure. Anthony, sweat beading on his forehead, shook his head. No, we're so close. This is an allergic reaction, manageable if we can isolate the antigen. The CRISPR is working, I can see it in the cellular scans. He gestured to the holographic display, a swirling vortex of genetic code. We just need to get past this. Hiccup, hiccup, Valerius echoed, his voice permeated with scorn. This hiccup threatens her very existence, human. Anthony ignored him, already barking orders at the AI. Run a full-spectrum analysis of the CRISPR delivery system. Identify any proteins, lipids, anything that could trigger an allergic response in Aleni physiology. He moved with a frantic energy, his hands flying across the control panel. Time was bleeding away with each ragged breath Aurora took. Hours blurred into a frenzied dance of analysis and deduction. Anthony, fueled by caffeine and desperation, pored over the data. He cross-referenced human immunological databases, searching for parallels, for clues. The small clinic, usually a haven of quiet efficiency, was now a chaotic mess of discarded equipment and scribbled notes. Finally, a breakthrough. Got it, Anthony exclaimed, pointing to a specific protein highlighted on the screen. Modified polyamine stabilizer, used to keep the CRISPR complex intact during delivery, unique to human manufacturing processes. It's the only thing that makes sense. So remove it, Lyra stated simply. Easier said than done, Anthony replied, his voice tight. The CRISPR complex will degrade without a stabilizer. We need a replacement, something compatible with Aleni physiology. He paused, his eyes narrowing in thought. I could synthesize a new stabilizer, using compounds available here. It'd be a risky, untested chemical reaction, but absolutely not. Valerius boomed, his holographic image flickering with anger. We will not allow you to experiment on her with unknown compounds. The risk is unacceptable. Anthony tightened fists, his gaze fixed on Aurora. Her breathing was becoming shallower, her exoskeleton visibly weakening. With all due respect, Counselor, we're out of time. This is the only way. He began gathering chemicals from his limited stock, his movements deliberate and focused. You defy the High Council, Valerius thundered. I'm trying to save her life. Anthony retorted, his voice rising in frustration. He ignored the High Council, focusing on the task at hand. Aurora, her voice weak but clear, spoke from the medical bed. Please, trust him, He knows what he's doing. I feel it. Her iridescent eyes, usually so bright, were clouded with pain, but they held a spark of unwavering faith. Lyra looked from Aurora to Anthony, her expression unreadable. Then she stepped forward, her slender hand reaching for a beaker. I have some experience with organic synthesis. Perhaps I can be of assistance. A rare moment of cross-species collaboration, born of desperation and a shared desire to save a life. Together, they worked, Anthony guiding Lyra through the intricate steps of the chemical reaction. The air crackled with tension, the fate of a young Aleni resting on their combined skills. Finally, a faint, iridescent liquid swirled in the beaker. The new stabilizer. Anthony cautiously administered the modified CRISPR complex, his hand trembling slightly. He watched Aurora's vital signs with nervous excitement, every click and whistle amplified in the tense silence. Slowly, miraculously, the rash began to recede. Aurora's breathing steadied, her exoskeleton regaining its integrity. The holographic readouts showed a gradual improvement in her oxygen saturation and intercarapace pressure. The Aleni High Council remained skeptical, their expressions guarded. A temporary reprieve, perhaps, Valerius conceded, his voice grudging. But the treatment is far from complete. Anthony knew he was right. The modified stabilizer, while effective in preventing the allergic reaction, was less efficient than the original. The gene editing process would take significantly longer, leaving Aurora vulnerable to further complications. As he continued the CRISPR treatment, the High Council's demand echoed in his ears. Daily, detailed updates. They would be watching his every move, scrutinizing his methods, waiting for him to fail. The pressure was immense, but Anthony pressed on, driven by his unwavering commitment to Aurora and his belief in the power of human ingenuity. The holographic image of the Aleni High Council flickered, their iridescent eyes reflecting the sterile light of Anthony's clinic. "Dr. Taylor," Counselor Vale said, her voice sharp, "the prolonged CRISPR treatment is raising serious concerns. We are detecting anomalies that could have significant long-term effects on Aurora's development." "Anomalies are to be expected with a novel treatment, Counselor," Anthony countered, his lips pursed. "But her core genetic markers are improving." "The chitin production is not the only metric of health, Doctor," another counselor, Zith, interrupted. "We are dispatching a team of specialists to conduct a complete diagnostic review. They will arrive within the hour." Anthony ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. "With all due respect, counselors, Aurora is increasingly frail. Such an intensive review will place undue stress on her system." Vale's gaze hardened. "The review is non-negotiable, Doctor. We must ensure the treatment's safety and efficacy." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Anthony staring at the blank screen. He turned to Aurora, who lay resting in a bio bed, her delicate form almost swallowed by the padding. "They're coming to poke and prod again, aren't they?" she whispered, her voice weak. Anthony gently stroked her head. "Just a checkup, Aurora, nothing to worry about." But his eyes betrayed his concern. The Aleni specialists arrived in a flurry of shimmering gowns and buzzing diagnostic equipment. They swarmed around Aurora, their multifaceted eyes scanning her from every angle. Anthony stood back, his frustration building as they meticulously scrutinized his every action. Hours later, Counselor Vale's image reappeared. "Doctor," she announced, her tone grave, "the diagnostic review has revealed a secondary complication, severe bone marrow suppression. Aurora's body is failing to produce new blood cells." One of the specialists, a gaunt Aleni with particularly large eyes, stepped forward. "The modified stabilizer you are using, Doctor, is the likely culprit. Its interaction with Aurora's unique physiology is inhibiting hematopoiesis." "That's a manageable side effect," Anthony insisted, his voice rising. "The stabilizer is crucial for the CRISPR treatment's efficacy. Discontinuing it now would be fatal. We cannot risk further compromising Aurora's health," Zith declared. "We propose a course of Aleni-derived growth factors to stimulate her bone marrow." "I have human-derived growth factors that would be far more effective," Anthony offered. "But I would need to make some—" "Absolutely not," Vale snapped. "The risk of cross-species incompatibility is too great. We will not allow human biological agents to further contaminate Aurora's system." "Then, what do you suggest?" Anthony demanded, his voice filled with desperation. "We are ordering you to halt the CRISPR treatment immediately," Vale stated firmly. "Aurora will be transferred to a specialized Aleni medical facility where she can receive appropriate care." Anthony's blood ran cold. "That would be a death sentence. She needs the CRISPR treatment and she needs it now. I'm the only one who can manage her condition." "Your services are no longer required, Doctor," Vale said, her voice devoid of emotion. The transmission cut off. Anthony stared at Aurora, her skin now translucent, her breathing shallow. He couldn't let them take her. He wouldn't. He retrieved a vial of human-derived growth factors from a hidden compartment in his med kit. His hands trembled as he prepared the injection. He knew he was defying the High Council, risking everything, but he couldn't stand idly by while Aurora withered away. Later that night, under the dim glow of the clinic's emergency lights, a shadowy figure slipped into Aurora's room. It was the Eleni medical expert, his multifaceted eyes filled with conflicted emotions. "Dr. Taylor," he whispered, "I cannot condone your actions, but I also cannot deny the urgency of the situation." "I need your help," Anthony said, his voice barely audible. "I'm administering the growth factors, but I need you to monitor her cellular response. I can't risk being seen doing this myself." Days blurred into weeks. Aurora's condition continued to deteriorate. Despite the growth factors, her fatigue deepened, her weakness intensified. The bone marrow suppression was unaffected. "It's not working," Anthony muttered, staring at the latest bloodwork results. "The human-derived factors, they're not compatible enough. Fundamental differences in cellular biology." Desperate, Anthony dove into the clinic's archives, scouring through ancient and obscure medical texts. He devoured information on Eleni physiology, searching for any alternative method to stimulate Aurora's bone marrow. He stumbled upon a forgotten Eleni medical technique, sonic resonance therapy. It involved using precisely calibrated sound waves to stimulate cellular regeneration. The technique had shown promise in early trials, but was ultimately abandoned due to its unpredictable nature. He approached the Eleni expert. "Have you ever heard of sonic resonance therapy?" The expert's eyes widened. "It is an ancient technique, doctor, highly experimental, very dangerous." "But it could work, couldn't it?" Anthony pressed. "It's her only chance." The expert hesitated. "It carries significant risks. Cellular disruption, tissue damage." Anthony turned to Aurora. "I've found something that might help, but it's risky." "It's your choice, Aurora." Aurora looked at him, her eyes filled with trust. "Do it, doctor, I trust you." As Anthony prepared to initiate the therapy, he noticed something horrifying. A network of fine cracks was spreading across Aurora's exoskeleton, like fissures on a dying planet. The chitin was failing, crumbling under the pressure. Time was running out. Suddenly, the clinic doors burst open. Red lights flashed and the harsh blare of sirens filled the air. Eleni security officers flooded the room, their weapons drawn. "Dr. Taylor," a booming voice shouted, "you are in violation of High Council orders. Surrender Aurora immediately." Anthony ignored them. He adjusted the sonic resonance emitter, his hands shaking. "Forgive me, Aurora," he whispered. Just as the security team reached for Aurora, Anthony activated the device. A low, pulsing hum filled the clinic, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. The effect on Aurora was immediate and unknown, lost in the ensuing chaos. The sonic resonance device hummed to life, a low thrum that vibrated through the very floor of the clinic. Pulsating waves of emerald energy washed over Aurora, her delicate, insected form shimmering in the light. Even before the energy reached full intensity, the doors to the clinic hissed open, and a squad of Eleni security personnel, clad in polished chitin armor, stormed inside. "Dr. Taylor," the lead officer barked, his voice amplified by his helmet's comm system. "Cease this procedure immediately. Surrender the patient to our custody." Anthony ignored him, his brow furrowed in concentration. His eyes darted between Aurora and the readings flickering across the cobbled together display of the sonic resonance device. Numbers scrolled too fast for anyone else to comprehend, but Anthony was hunting for a pattern, a sign. A high-pitched cry pierced the air. Aurora writhed on the examination table, her slender limbs twitching. Visible tremors coursed through her exoskeleton like ripples on a pond. "It's too much," she gasped, her voice thin and reedy. "Please, make it stop." "Hold, Captain," a voice called out from behind the security team. It was the Eleni medical expert who had accompanied them, his face etched with concern. You'll only exacerbate her condition. This treatment, it's experimental, we don't know the full effects. The captain, his mandibles clicking impatiently, waved a dismissive hand. Council orders are clear. The human is operating outside established protocols. Secure the patient. The security team advanced, weapons raised. Their stun batons crackled with blue energy. Anthony didn't look up. Damn it, he muttered, his fingers flying across a control panel salvaged from a derelict freighter. Not enough time. As the first officer reached for him, Anthony smacked his palm down on a large, red button. A low whine filled the room, followed by the distinct crackle of energy. A shimmering, invisible barrier sprang into existence, encircling the examination table. The security team stumbled back, colliding with each other as they were repelled by the sudden force. It was a repurposed magnetic field generator, designed to contain plasma leaks in fusion reactors, now serving as a desperate line of defense. He's using illegal technology. The captain roared, regaining his footing. Breach that field. The magnetic field held for only a precious few seconds, but it was enough. Anthony watched the readings on the device spike, numbers blurring into an incomprehensible mess. Something's happening, he whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. But what? He deactivated the sonic resonance device. The emerald light faded and the humming ceased. Aurora went limp on the table, her breathing shallow and ragged. With a surge, the security team broke through the magnetic field, the energy barrier collapsing with a fizzle. They swarmed Anthony, pinning him against the wall, his arms twisted behind his back. Get her onto the transport gurney, the captain ordered. We're taking her back to the medical facility. No, the Eleni expert protested, his voice rising in panic. You can't move her in this state. Her exoskeleton is compromised. The slightest jolt could be fatal. The captain ignored him. Those are my orders, from the High Council themselves. Two officers roughly lifted Aurora onto a hovering gurney. As they did, segments of her exoskeleton, normally a smooth, iridescent green, began to flake off like dried leaves. Beneath, a layer of newly formed tissue, pale and fragile, was visible. It pulsed with a faint internal light. The Eleni expert stared in disbelief, his mandibles agape. By the Great Weaver. He breathed. It's regenerating. But how? Anthony, struggling against his restraints, strained to see. Stop, he shouted, his voice hoarse. That new tissue is unstable. It needs immediate stabilization. A specialized protein bath followed by. Silence him, the captain snapped. He's just trying to manipulate us. The Eleni expert stood frozen, torn between his duty to the High Council and the undeniable evidence before his eyes. He looked at Aurora, her face pale and peaceful in unconsciousness. He looked at Anthony, his eyes burning with desperate urgency. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that the captain was making a terrible mistake. In a swift, unexpected move, the Eleni expert shoved the security officer closest to him, sending him stumbling into his comrades. Release him, he yelled, his voice ringing with newfound authority. He's the only one who can save her. Confusion erupted. Taking advantage of the chaos, the expert yanked a stun baton from a fallen officer and sliced through Anthony's restraints. We have to get her to the stabilization unit, he shouted. Now, together they rushed to the gurney, overriding the security controls. The gurney lurched forward, carrying Aurora deeper into the clinic. They were on the run, fugitives from the High Council itself. On Ilion, 1,000 light-years away, the news reached the High Council chambers like a thunderclap. Faces normally serene and composed contorted with fury. Insubordination. One council member shrieked. Defiance. The human has stolen the child. Find them and bring them to justice. Her exoskeleton flaked away like dying leaves in a thermal wind, leaving patches of her delicate, iridescent skin exposed. Vital signs cascaded downwards, the rhythmic pulsing of her bioluminescent veins flickering erratically. Each shallow breath rattled in her chest, a sound that clawed at Anthony's insides. "Systemic shock," he barked, his voice tight with a fear he refused to acknowledge. "The cellular regeneration is happening too fast, overwhelming her system. We need to stabilize her now." The Eleni expert, his mandibles clicking nervously, wrung his multi-jointed hands. There is a possibility, a research outpost, abandoned, on asteroid Theta 9. It is not far." Without a word, Anthony scooped Aurora into his arms, her weight alarmingly light. "Let's move." He followed the expert through the sterile corridors, the alarm klaxons a deafening symphony of impending doom. They reached a docking bay where a small, battered transport ship sat gathering dust. "This thing barely flies," Anthony muttered, eyeing the rust-colored streaks marring its hull. "It is functional," the expert stammered, overriding the security lock with a series of rapid clicks and whirs. "It is our only option." Inside the transport ship was a cramped, dimly lit box. Anthony gently laid Aurora on a grimy metal bench. While the expert fumbled with the archaic controls, Anthony ripped open his medical kit, his mind racing. He needed an incubator, something to regulate her temperature and oxygen flow. "Give me anything you've got," he demanded, his voice sharp. "Anything that can hold air and regulate temperature." The expert rummaged through a storage compartment, producing a dented metal container and a tangle of wires. Working with frantic speed, Anthony combined these with components from his medical kit: a thermal regulator, a makeshift oxygenator, and a nutrient IV drip. Within minutes, a jury-rigged incubator hummed weakly, bathing Aurora in a soft, artificial glow. As the transport ship lurched into hyperspace, the expert turned to Anthony, his expression troubled. "There is something you should know about the outpost. It was shut down. Unethical experiments, forced evolution. They were trying to accelerate the Eleni life cycle." Anthony's face hardened. "So, we're heading to a place where they played God." Asteroid Theta 9 was a desolate rock, scarred by meteor impacts and shrouded in perpetual darkness. The abandoned outpost was a cluster of interconnected modules, its exterior plating corroded and breached in several places. Power flickered intermittently, casting long, dancing shadows. "Damn it," Anthony cursed, kicking a loose panel that clattered down a darkened corridor. "This place is a tomb." Inside the outpost was a labyrinth of decaying equipment and cobweb-draped consoles. The air hung thick with the smell of ozone and decay. Anthony found the central database, its holographic interface flickering erratically. "Corrupted," he announced grimly, running a diagnostic scan. "The data is fragmented, unusable." The expert touched a series of pressure plates hidden beneath a damaged console. "I know the old access protocols. I can reroute auxiliary power." A moment later, a section of the facility flickered to life, bathing the room in a sickly green light. Back at the makeshift incubator, Aurora's condition remained critical. Anthony scanned her with his handheld device, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Her cellular growth is unstable. I need a biostabilizer, something to regulate the chitin synthesis." He looked around the dilapidated lab, desperation creeping into his voice. "There has to be something here." "There is one possibility," the expert said hesitantly. "A hidden cache." Experimental genetic stabilizers, but they were designed for a different subspecies of Eleni. They may be incompatible. Anthony stared at him, his mind racing. Untested stabilizers designed for a different species. It was a gamble, a desperate one. But what choice did he have? He looked at Aurora, her fragile form barely visible beneath the shimmering field of the incubator. He thought of the Eleni High Council, their cold pronouncements, their dismissal of her life. He thought of his past, of the patients he had lost, the failures that haunted him. "Show me," he said, his voice firm. The hidden cache was located in a sealed vault, its entrance concealed behind a dislodged panel. Inside, rows of vials glowed with an eerie light, each labeled with indecipherable symbols. Anthony selected a vial at random, holding it up to the light. These are useless to us in their current form. I need to resequence it. Hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Anthony, fueled by caffeine and adrenaline, worked tirelessly, his knowledge of human biochemistry his only guide. He isolated the active compound, modified its molecular structure, and ran countless simulations on his portable computer, his hope dwindling with each failed attempt. As he prepared to administer the modified stabilizer, a piercing alarm blared through the outpost. The expert's head snapped up, his antennae twitching. Eleni warships. They have detected the transport ship's distress beacon. A comms panel crackled to life. A stern, holographic image of an Eleni commander filled the room. This is the warship Righteous Fury. You are in violation of High Council decree. Surrender the stolen child immediately, or we will be forced to destroy this facility. The expert received a private message on his personal comlink. It was from a sympathetic member of the High Council. Return, Aurora. We can protect you both. This human is out of his depth. Anthony, oblivious to the expert's internal conflict, injected the modified stabilizer into Aurora's IV line. A moment later, her body convulsed violently. Her bioluminescent veins flared, then dimmed, then flared again with terrifying intensity. "What have you done?" the expert cried, his voice filled with panic. Aurora's internal organs began to shut down one by one. Her breathing became ragged, her skin clammy. The modified stabilizer had triggered a catastrophic immune response, her own body turning against itself. The warship Righteous Fury hailed the outpost again. Final warning: surrender the child or face annihilation. The Eleni expert stared at Anthony, his expression a mask of anguish and indecision. Betray him. Hand over Aurora to the High Council and hope for leniency, or trust in this human who had brought them to the brink of destruction. Suddenly, Anthony's eyes widened. He grabbed his scanner, running it over Aurora's failing body. Wait, the immune response. It's targeting a specific protein. One that's similar to a common allergen in humans. Histamine, she's having an allergic reaction. Histamine, she's having an allergic reaction. Anthony's mind raced. Alar, prep an epinephrine drip stat, increase the oxygen flow. He barked the orders, ignoring the Eleni expert's frantic pleas. Doctor, you don't understand. Her physiology doesn't matter right now, Anthony snapped, his focus solely on the rapidly dimming luminescence of Aurora's skin. She's not breathing properly. We lose her now, nothing else matters. He ripped open another pack of sterile wipes, scrubbing at the injection site. A rash, angry and purple, was spreading like wildfire across her delicate exoskeleton. He had to isolate the protein causing the reaction. Fast. The lab was a mess, a chaotic blend of human and Eleni tech jury rigged together. He grabbed a handheld spectrometer, its casing scarred and patched with sealant. The air hummed with the mismatched frequencies of alien and human equipment. Guiding the device over Aurora's arm, he initiated a scan. A holographic display flickered to life, projecting a complex molecular structure. It was alien, yet familiar. A modified version of a common human allergen, something found in Terran ragweed of all things. While Anthony worked, the Eleni expert, his carapace slick with a nervous sweat, was attempting to contact the High Council. This is Counselor Rail. I must speak with someone immediately. His voice was a strained whisper tinged with desperation. A cold, modulated voice responded. Counselor, you are exceeding your communication allowance. State your purpose. It's Aurora, the human. The treatment is causing a severe allergic reaction. I request immediate medical transport. Silence. Then the High Council has been monitoring the situation. We are prepared to offer a medical transport, Counselor, in exchange for the patient. Exchange, you mean? The human is clearly out of his depth. Secure Aurora and we will dispatch a vessel to retrieve her. Her safety is our priority. Anthony, oblivious to the negotiation, cursed under his breath. Damn it, I need a protein sequencer. He remembered seeing one tucked away in a storage closet, a relic from the outpost's early days. Ilar, watch her vitals. I'll be right back. The closet was crammed with discarded equipment, dusty crates, and forgotten experiments. He rummaged through the debris, his fingers tracing the contours of unfamiliar technology. Finally, he found a bulky protein sequencer, its power cord severed. A label, faded and peeling, read, "Requires Type 7 energy cell. Type 7, rare as hen's teeth this far out." As if on cue, the outpost's comm system blared to life. A harsh, metallic voice filled the lab. "Outpost Gamma 9, this is Eleni Patrol Vessel Keenblade. You are harboring a fugitive. Surrender the patient immediately, or we will be forced to take action." The expert winced, his mandibles clicking nervously. Anthony ignored the threat, focusing on the sequencer. He needed that antidote. "Doctor," Ilar called out, "her carapace, it's starting to fissure." He scrambled back to Aurora's side. The faint cracks were widening, spider webbing across her exoskeleton. Time was running out. There, Ilar pointed to a storage locker. Inside, nestled amongst cracked vials and corroded tools, was an energy cell, but it was damaged, its casing fractured, leaking a faint, sickly green radiation. "Unusable," the expert declared, his voice imbued with despair. "The radiation will kill us all." Anthony stared at the cell, his mind churning. He remembered a technique he'd learned back in med school, a way to contain radiation leaks using a localized magnetic field. A technique developed for handling spills in primitive human reactors. "Ilar, get me a magnetic field generator, the small portable one, now." The Eleni expert watched in disbelief as Anthony, using scavenged parts and sheer ingenuity, jury-rigged a containment field around the leaking energy cell. A shimmering blue bubble enveloped the damaged casing, the crackling radiation visibly contained. "Impossible," the expert muttered, his multifaceted eyes wide with surprise. "How?" Anthony didn't answer. He was too busy wrestling the energy cell into the sequencer. He powered it up, the machine sputtering and groaning as it came to life. The display flickered, then stabilized, revealing a series of complex algorithms. "Damn it," Anthony said, smacking his fist on the console. "The database is incomplete. It's missing the precise molecular structure of the allergen." The outpost shuddered. Outside, the Keenblade had opened fire. Structural supports groaned under the assault. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. "They're going to collapse the whole damn place," Anthony shouted over the din. The Eleni expert, his face a mask of conflicted emotions, moved towards the comm panel. He accessed a hidden channel, a secure line to the Eleni medical databanks. His fingers flew across the controls, bypassing security protocols. "What are you doing?" Anthony demanded. "Retrieving the allergen's molecular structure," the expert replied, his voice tight. "It's the only way." He downloaded the data, a stream of complex code cascading across the screen. He transferred it to the protein sequencer. "It's in," he announced, his voice barely audible above the explosions. "But hurry, they know I'm here." Anthony worked feverishly, inputting the data, calibrating the sequencer. The machine whirred and clicked, synthesizing a clear, viscous fluid. "A rudimentary antidote," Anthony said, injecting the fluid into a sterile vial. "Untested, could make things worse." He looked at Aurora, her breathing shallow and ragged. He looked at the vial. He looked at the Eleni expert, whose face was etched with guilt and fear. The expert confessed his communication with the High Council member and the deal he made, torn between Eleni duty and his growing respect for Anthony. "I contacted the High Council. I told them I could secure Aurora in exchange for transport. I thought it was the right thing to do." Anthony stared at him, anger warring with understanding. "You sold her out." I didn't know they would bombard the outpost. I thought they would negotiate." Anthony closed his eyes, took a breath. "It doesn't matter now. We're out of time." He grabbed the vial and injected the antidote into Aurora's arm. Her body convulsed. Her luminescence flickered violently, then died. Her breathing stopped. "No," Anthony cried, his voice raw with despair. The Eleni expert, his face contorted with horror, scrambled to the comm panel. With a desperate cry, he ripped out the power cables, severing the outpost's connection to the Eleni network. "What did you do?" Anthony yelled. "I can't let them track us," the expert gasped. "I made a mistake, a terrible mistake." A low, grinding sound filled the lab. Anthony turned back to Aurora. Her exoskeleton was changing. The cracks were widening, deepening. A crystalline substance was forming, spreading rapidly across her body. Her shell was hardening, trapping her within a rapidly forming prison. Metal screamed under Anthony's futile efforts. The standard-issue pry bars were useless against the rapidly hardening resin of Aurora's makeshift exoskeleton, bouncing harmlessly off its surface. "Damn it!" he roared, tossing the useless tool aside. The Eleni expert, his face a mask of grim concern, said, "Focused sonic vibrations. It is a technique my people use in mining operations, if we could generate the correct frequency." "We can't," Anthony snapped. "This backwater outpost doesn't have sonic mining equipment." His eyes scanned the cluttered lab, desperation clawing at his throat. Then he remembered. "Wait." He scrambled towards a pile of discarded tech, pulling out a diagnostic tool, its casing cracked and wires spilling out. "This old spectral imager. The sonic emitter. It's damaged, but—" He began stripping wires, his fingers flying with practiced speed, repurposing the emitter into a makeshift sonic cutter. The cutter whined to life, a high-pitched keening that vibrated through the room. He carefully guided the device along the hardening resin, watching as it slowly, agonizingly began to eat its way through. Sparks flew. "It's working, but it's slow," he grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "And this vibration. I'm worried it's causing her more damage." Suddenly, the lights flickered violently. A section of the ceiling panel crashed down. "They've intensified their attack," the expert shouted, pointing to the shaking walls. The makeshift cutter sputtered, died, and went silent. The outpost's power grid couldn't handle the strain. "No power," Anthony cursed, hitting his fist on the workbench. Thinking fast, he grabbed a manual crank generator, salvaged from a long-dead atmospheric regulator. "Hold this steady." He barked at the expert, jamming the cutter's power cord into the generator. With the expert furiously cranking, the cutter sputtered back to life, albeit weakly. The Eleni expert, his face strained, tried the comm panel again. Static. The comm array. "It has been sabotaged. I cannot reach Counselor Velara." Anthony glanced at Aurora. The hardening resin had now reached her head, encasing her face. Suffocation was imminent. He adjusted the sonic cutter's frequency, pushing it to its limits. A high-pitched resonant vibration filled the room, making their teeth ache. Fine cracks spiderwebbed across the resin around Aurora's face. A barely audible whisper reached him, "Help." The expert, his eyes wide with fear, pointed to the flickering energy shields display. "The shields are failing. They will breach the outer defenses soon." He paused, then said, "There is a coolant system for the lower levels. If we flood them, it will create a thermal barrier, slow them down." "It's risky," Anthony said, knowing the dangers of rapid temperature change. But they were out of options. He activated the coolant system. Alarms blared. Instead of a controlled release, a torrent of cryogenic fluid flooded the room, vents malfunctioning, spraying the area with icy mist. Aurora's vital signs plummeted. The Eleni expert watched the monitors, his face etched with despair. "Her core temperature. It is dropping too fast." Without hesitation, Anthony ripped off his jacket and pressed himself against Aurora, using his own body heat to fight the encroaching cold. "Come on, Aurora," he muttered, his teeth chattering. "Hang in there." A deafening explosion rocked the outpost. Red lights flashed. "They've breached the outer defenses," the expert yelled. "Boarding parties incoming." He grabbed an energy rifle from a weapons locker, his face set with relentless drive. "I will defend you both." Ignoring the chaos, the cold, and the imminent threat, Anthony focused on the resin encasing Aurora. The resonant vibration was working. With a final surge of effort, he managed to fully free her. As the last piece of exoskeleton fell away, he saw that her skin beneath was no longer its normal iridescent blue. It was shifting, swirling with colors he'd never seen before. Aurora's eyes snapped open. They glowed with an unnatural internal light, pulsing with raw energy. The biting chill of the coolant was immediate, a stark contrast to the heat of the firefight moments before. Anthony ripped open a thermal blanket, the thin material crackling in the recycled air, and draped it over Aurora, whose iridescent skin was rapidly paling. "Stimulants," he barked, rummaging through his medkit with frantic movements. He found a hypo spray and jammed it into her arm, the hiss of the injector barely audible over the echoing gunfire. "Go!" He yelled at the Eleni expert, not daring to take his eyes off Aurora's vitals. The expert, with a guttural cry, surged forward, plasma pistol blazing. The narrow corridor became a maelstrom of energy, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burning metal. Ricocheting coolant sprayed like a deadly rain. The expert, despite his limp, moved with a practiced grace, his shots precise and deadly. Then a surge of raw power. Aurora, convulsing, arched her back, and a wave of violet energy pulsed from her body, vaporizing a chunk of the coolant that hung in the air. For a split second, the corridor was clear, illuminated by the eerie glow. What was that? Anthony muttered, his mind racing. He glanced at his scanner, its readings spiking wildly. The energy signature. It was bioelectrical, similar to the energy used in Eleni weapons, but raw, uncontrolled. A terrifying potential unleashed. A searing blast ripped through the doorway, forcing Anthony back behind a shattered console. The Eleni boarding party had breached the main chamber. He, Aurora, and the expert were pinned. Peeking over the console, Anthony saw the boarding party was equipped with specialized containment devices, intricate energy nets, and dampening cages. They knew about Aurora's powers. They were prepared. The expert, with a series of rapid, almost rhythmic energy blasts, sent the boarding party scrambling for cover. Each shot was carefully placed, exploiting the coolant-slicked floor and the cramped confines of the outpost. It was a display of honed skill, revealing a past far removed from the quiet scientist he'd presented himself as. But Aurora was weakening. The uncontrolled energy expenditure was taking its toll. Her breathing was shallow, her exoskeleton trembling. "We need to stop this," Anthony said, his voice tight with urgency. "She can't handle it." As if in response, Aurora shuddered again, and a localized energy field erupted around her, causing the boarding party's weapons to sputter and die. The soldiers cursed in Eleni, frantically trying to reboot their systems. Anthony's eyes narrowed. He remembered the schematics of Eleni energy weapons, how they relied on precise harmonic frequencies. Aurora's uncontrolled energy was disrupting those frequencies. An idea sparked in his mind, desperate but potentially viable. He grabbed a discarded energy cell from a deactivated rifle. "Cover me." He yelled at the expert, his fingers flying across the cell's casing, stripping it down to its core components. He needed a dampener, something to regulate her energy output. A searing pain tore through Anthony's left side as the expert was hit. He staggered back, clutching his wound, his face contorted in pain. The boarding party pressed their advantage. Ignoring the chaos, Anthony worked feverishly, modifying the energy cell. He rerouted its circuits, creating a feedback loop designed to absorb and dissipate excess energy. It was crude, untested, but it was all he had. He finished the makeshift device and lunged towards Aurora, attaching it to a port on her exoskeleton. The device hummed to life, a faint blue light pulsing beneath its surface. Aurora gasped, her body relaxing slightly. The uncontrolled energy surges subsided, but she was noticeably weaker. The leader of the boarding party, a tall, imposing Alini with cold, calculating eyes, rounded the corner, his weapon charged and aimed directly at Anthony and Aurora. "The High Council will be pleased," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Her abilities will ensure our dominance." He stepped closer, revealing the insignia of a lesser-known faction within the council. Aurora, her eyes flickering with returning awareness, focused on the sonic cutter lying discarded on the floor. With a visible effort, she channeled a thread of her energy into the device. The cutter began to hum, the vibrations intensifying, the air around it shimmering with heat. Anthony understood. He grabbed the cutter, the handle almost too hot to touch. The leader of the boarding party sneered. "A pathetic human weapon," he scoffed. Anthony didn't reply. He slammed the supercharged cutter against the leader's weapon, the amplified sonic vibrations disrupting its energy flow. The weapon sparked and died, leaving the leader momentarily vulnerable. The expert, seizing the opportunity, unleashed a volley of plasma blasts, forcing the leader to dive for cover. "We can't win this," the expert gasped, clutching his side. "But perhaps. The outpost's communication array, damaged but maybe, enough to send a distress signal." Anthony glanced at Aurora, still weakened but conscious. He knew the dampener was suppressing her power, keeping her alive. But he also knew that suppressing her power was a short-term solution. They needed to weaponize her abilities, but without killing her in the process. An idea sparked in his mind: modulate the sonic vibration to give a wider burst, like a sonic grenade. "Rig the emergency coolant system," Anthony instructed, his voice firm despite the tremor in his hands. "Overload it. Create a thermal shockwave. It's our only chance to escape." Anthony banged his head onto the activation panel, initiating the coolant overload sequence. The outpost shuddered, a low-grown building in the metal bones of the structure. Warning klaxons blared, their harsh cries amplified by the confined space. Red emergency lights strobed, painting the grimy walls in a pulsating crimson. The vibration intensified, rattling equipment and making it difficult to stand. "Now!" Anthony yelled above the din. He and the expert, supporting Aurora between them, moved toward the flickering light of the maintenance tunnel entrance. Their pre-planned escape route, the sonic cutter still whining from its recent use, echoed through the corridor. Apparently the Alini boarding party had been momentarily disoriented by the shaking, but they were regrouping. The heavy thud of armored boots grew louder behind them. A deafening roar ripped through the outpost. The coolant system, pushed beyond its limits, exploded. A massive thermal shockwave slammed into them, a searing wave of heat and pressure. Anthony threw himself over Aurora, shielding her from the worst of it. The Alini boarding party, caught in the full force of the blast, were thrown back, their screams cut short by the explosion. The main chamber doors slammed shut with a resounding clang, sealing them off. Anthony staggered to his feet, pulling Aurora up with him. "Let's go, now!" They plunged into the maintenance tunnel. It was a claustrophobic space, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Exposed wires snaked across the low ceiling, dripping condensation. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and stale coolant. Dim emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows, making it difficult to see. The expert winced, clutching their side. Their breath came in ragged gasps. Anthony stopped, his face grim. "Let me see that." He gently pulled the expert's hand away, revealing a dark stain spreading across their makeshift bandage. "Damn it, that needs immediate attention. Infection's going to set in fast." He pulled a sterile field dressing from his medical kit and quickly applied it to the wound, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. "This is temporary. We need to get you proper medical care." Aurora, her large, iridescent eyes filled with concern, reached out and gently touched the expert's arm. A faint blue glow emanated from her fingertips. The expert gasped, their body tensing. "Aurora, no," Anthony warned, but it was too late. A jolt of energy surged through the tunnel, the dim lights flickering violently. The air crackled with static electricity. The outpost groaned again, louder this time. Anthony cursed under his breath. That energy is unstable. You're overloading the system. He grabbed Aurora's hand, pulling her away from the expert. We can't risk that again. The tunnel lurched. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. A section of the tunnel wall buckled inward, groaning under immense pressure. We have to move, now, Anthony shouted. He grabbed Aurora and pulled her forward, the expert limping along behind them. A section of the tunnel ceiling collapsed, a cascade of metal and concrete blocking their path. They were trapped. Anthony swore again, his mind racing. He scanned the tunnel, his eyes searching for a solution. There. He pointed to a pile of discarded support struts and a toolbox lying near the collapsed section. Help me with these. Working quickly, Anthony scavenged tools and materials from the tunnel. He jury-rigged a makeshift support structure, wedging the struts between the floor and the weakened ceiling. Sparks flew as he welded pieces together, the acrid smell of burning metal filling the air. He worked with a frantic energy, knowing that every second counted. As Anthony worked, the expert leaned against the tunnel wall, their face pale. You need to know something, they said, their voice strained. The Eleni faction that wants Aurora, they're led by Counselor Valerius. He believes her powers. He believes they can turn the tide in the brewing civil war within the Eleni High Council. Aurora, overhearing the conversation, gasped. Her eyes widened with fear and she recoiled, pulling away from Anthony. A weapon. She whispered, her voice trembling. They want to use me as a weapon. Anthony stopped working, his face hardening with anger. He turned to Aurora, kneeling down to meet her gaze. No, he said firmly, taking her hands in his. I won't let that happen. I promise you, Aurora, I will never let anyone use you. I'm going to help you control your powers, not let them control you. They reached a junction in the maintenance tunnel. One path continued straight while the other branched off to the right. Anthony paused, his eyes scanning the walls. He ran his hand along the cold metal, feeling for any sign of an opening. Here, he said, his fingers tracing the outline of a hidden access panel. Secondary communication array. It's not on any of the schematics. He pried open the panel, revealing a small, cramped compartment filled with dusty equipment. A holographic display flickered weakly, showing a jumble of static. It's still partially functional, Anthony said, his voice tinged with hope. But it needs a significant power boost to transmit a distress signal. He looked at Aurora, his expression grave. We could use your energy, Aurora, to supercharge it, but it could be dangerous. It could further weaken you. Aurora looked at him, her eyes filled with fear and uncertainty. It may be our only hope, the expert said, their voice weak but firm. Anthony sighed, his decision made. All right, let's do it. He began to connect Aurora to the array, his hands moving quickly and efficiently. Suddenly, a volley of energy blasts ripped through the tunnel. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. Ambush, the expert yelled, shoving Anthony and Aurora behind a stack of crates. A squad of Eleni soldiers, having somehow circumvented the coolant blast, emerged from the far end of the tunnel, their weapons trained on them. Go, get the signal out. The expert shouted, drawing their weapon. I'll hold them off. The expert stood their ground, firing wildly at the advancing soldiers, giving Anthony and Aurora time to activate the communication array. They were making their last stand. Anthony, racing against time, connected Aurora to the array. He channeled her energy into the system, the holographic display flickering wildly as the power surged. A fragmented distress signal shot out into the void, a desperate plea for help. The surge of energy destabilized the already weakened tunnel. The remaining supports groaned and buckled. With a final, earth-shattering roar, the maintenance tunnel collapsed. The tunnel groaned, a monstrous sigh of stressed metal, and then a section of the ceiling gave way with a deafening crash. Dust billowed, choking the air and stinging Anthony's eyes. The expert, a hulking Krell warrior, roared a defiant challenge as he held back the pursuing Eleni soldiers, buying them precious seconds. Then, the world fractured. Another collapse sealed the tunnel behind them, severing their path and leaving Anthony and Aurora in near darkness. He coughed, spitting out grit. The air tasted of ozone and pulverized rock. Damn it, he thought, his mind racing. Trapped. Tunnels unstable. No way back. He fumbled for his helmet light, its beam cutting through the gloom. Aurora was a trembling shadow beside him, her large, iridescent eyes wide with terror. The sounds of distant fighting, muffled by tons of debris, only amplified her fear. She clung to his leg, her delicate frame shaking. Anthony knelt, gently prying her fingers loose. Hey, it's okay, he said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. We're going to be okay. He scanned the wreckage, his engineer's mind already searching for a solution. He spotted a small pocket of relatively clear space, shielded by a fallen support beam. Come on, let's get you somewhere safer. He guided her to the small space, easing her down onto a relatively flat piece of debris. Stay here, okay? I'm going to find a way out. His voice brooked no argument. He needed her to trust him to stay put. Turning back to the collapsed tunnel, Anthony began to heave at a large section of twisted metal. It wouldn't budge. He needed another way. His gaze swept the tunnel walls, searching for any weakness, any opening. There near the ceiling, a partially blocked ventilation shaft. Small, but maybe. He scrambled towards it, testing the surrounding rock for stability. It seemed solid enough. The shaft was mostly blocked by a tangle of wires and a chunk of concrete, just enough space to maybe squeeze through if he cleared it. Anthony pulled out his multi-tool, the hum of its energy blade a small beacon of hope in the oppressive silence. Sparks flew as he began cutting through the debris, the smell of burning metal acrid in the confined space. I can help, Aurora whispered, her voice barely audible. He turned to see her small hand outstretched, a faint blue energy shimmering around it. I can try to hold it, to make it more stable. He hesitated, then nodded. Okay, focus your energy on the metal, Aurora. Just hold it steady. Don't overexert yourself. He could feel the subtle shift as her energy enveloped the metal, a faint vibration that seemed to solidify the unstable structure. It was a small thing, but it was enough. He worked faster, the energy blade slicing through the remaining obstacles. Finally, with a groan of protesting metal, the passage was clear. A narrow, jagged opening into the ventilation shaft. Okay, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. This is going to be tight, stay close behind me. He squeezed into the shaft, the metal edges scraping against his armor. It was cramped, dusty, and filled with the unsettling creaks and groans of structural damage. He could feel Aurora close behind him, her small hands pushing him forward. They crawled for what felt like an eternity, the darkness broken only by the faint beam of his helmet light. The air was thick with dust, each breath a gritty reminder of their precarious situation. Then, the shaft opened into a junction. Two paths diverged, one leading deeper into the outpost, the other angling upwards, potentially towards an exterior vent. Anthony pulled out his handheld sensor, its screen flickering to life. He ran it along the walls of each path, the readings painting a grim picture. The upward path showed signs of severe structural damage, the metal weakened and unstable. The deeper path, while still damaged, seemed marginally more sound. We go this way, he said, pointing his light down the deeper path. It's more stable. They continued crawling, the silence broken only by their ragged breathing and the unsettling groans of the outpost around them. Then a voice, crackling with static, echoed through the ventilation shaft. Repeat, coolant system failure in Sector 7. I want that child secured. Valerius out. Anthony froze. Counselor Valerius, the man who had condemned Aurora. Aurora gasped, her body tensing. He wants me, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. It's my fault. All of this is my fault. Anthony turned, gently cupping her face in his hands. "No," he said firmly, his eyes locking onto hers. "None of this is your fault. Valerius is a ruthless bastard and he would have done this regardless. You understand? You are not responsible for his actions. I promise to protect you, Aurora, and I will." He pulled her close, holding her tight. He could feel her trembling, but he also sensed a flicker of grit in her eyes. They continued crawling, the transmission hanging heavy in the air. Finally, the ventilation shaft opened into a larger space. A derelict storage room filled with damaged equipment, forgotten supplies, and a thick layer of dust. Anthony stood, stretching his aching muscles. He scanned the room, his eyes searching for anything useful. A broken comm unit, a pile of discarded energy cells, a dented medical kit. Then in a corner, half buried beneath a pile of debris, he spotted it, an emergency beacon. And next to it, a damaged energy pistol. "Stay here," he told Aurora. "I'm going to see if I can get this pistol working." He knelt, examining the weapon. The casing was cracked and the power cell was drained, but the firing mechanism seemed intact. He pulled out his multi-tool and began to work, carefully bypassing the damaged circuits and rerouting the power flow. As Anthony tinkered with the pistol, Aurora wandered around the room, her gaze drawn to a series of strange symbols etched into the walls. They were faded and worn, almost invisible beneath the grime. She reached out a tentative finger, tracing the lines of one of the symbols. A jolt of recognition shot through her. She knew this dialect. It was an ancient form of Eleni related to energy manipulation, a language lost to time except here. "Anthony," she said, her voice filled with wonder, "look at this." She led him to a section of the wall, pointing to the symbols. This is a map, an ancient map, it shows. A hidden passage." She pressed against the wall and a section of it slid inward, revealing a dark, narrow opening, a possible escape route. They stepped through the opening, finding themselves in a narrow, descending passage. The air was cool and damp, and the darkness seemed to press in on them from all sides. They were going deeper. The entrance was tighter than it looked, forcing Anthony to hunch low. The rock was cool and damp against his hand, slick with a film of unseen moisture. Aurora, smaller and more agile, slipped in ahead of him. "Careful, Doctor," she called back, her voice echoing faintly. "It slopes downwards." He followed, his boots scuffing against the uneven floor. The only light came from the bioluminescent patches on Aurora's carapace, casting long, dancing shadows that distorted the tunnel's already unsettling geometry. The air hung heavy, thick with the smell of minerals and something else. Something ancient and indefinably alien. The slope was steeper than he anticipated. He stumbled, reaching out to steady himself against the wall. Aurora, sensing his difficulty, extended a hand. Her grip, surprisingly strong, helped him regain his balance. "Thank you," he said, a little breathless. As they descended further, Anthony noticed intricate symbols etched into the tunnel walls. They were unlike anything he'd seen before, even in the extensive Eleni archives. More angular, more geometric. "What are these?" he asked, running a gloved hand over the cool stone. Aurora approached, her iridescent eyes scanning the glyphs. She frowned, tilting her head. "These are old, very old, before the Great Unification." A flicker of recognition crossed her face. "They speak of pathways of energy." Her voice was hushed, almost reverent. "They show a network, chambers beneath us, and a source of power." The tunnel opened abruptly into a vast, cavernous chamber. The air, though still heavy, felt less oppressive. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls and ceiling, casting an ethereal, pulsating glow that revealed the chamber's immense scale. It was larger than any natural cave system Anthony had ever seen. In the center of the chamber stood a structure of colossal proportions. It was a conduit of some kind, crafted from the same dark, obsidian-like material as the outpost itself. Dormant, yet undeniably powerful. Faint pulses of energy flickered across its surface, like the last embers of a dying fire. Anthony approached cautiously, his multi-tool humming softly as it scanned the conduit. Residual energy signatures. He muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. Fascinating, the readings. They're a partial match for Aurora's biosignature, almost like a resonance. A faint, rhythmic chanting echoed through the chamber, barely audible above the hum of his equipment. It was low and guttural, a sound that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. He straightened, his hand instinctively moving to the energy pistol at his side. He finished repairing it earlier, and it now felt reassuringly solid in his grip. "Did you hear that?" Aurora nodded, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. "Yes, it's coming from deeper within." They proceeded cautiously, moving along the edge of the chamber. Several smaller passages branched off from the main cavern, each shrouded in shadow. Anthony swept his pistol back and forth, his senses on high alert. They entered one of the smaller chambers. It was circular and eerily silent. In the center, scattered across the floor, were skeletal remains. Not just one, but several. They were Eleni, adorned with elaborate headdresses and ceremonial garb. The bones were brittle and crumbling, but the intricate designs on the headdresses were still visible, hinting at some kind of ritualistic practice. Aurora gasped, recoiling in horror. What happened here?" "I don't know," Anthony said grimly, "but it doesn't look good." The chanting grew louder, more insistent, emanating from one of the deeper passages. Aurora pointed, her voice trembling. "It's coming from there, and I feel a strong energy." Anthony aimed his multi-tool at the entrance to the passage. "There's an energy shield of some kind, crude but functional, makeshift power source. I can disrupt it." He adjusted the settings on his multi-tool, focusing its energy beam on the shield's power source. A low hum filled the air, followed by a sharp crackle. The shield flickered and died, plunging the passage into darkness. An alarm blared, a piercing shriek that echoed through the chamber. The chanting intensified, rising to a fever pitch. Then, from the depths of the passage, shadowy figures emerged. They were Eleni, but twisted and distorted. Their carapaces were warped and overgrown, their eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and they wielded primitive energy weapons that crackled with raw power. Anthony raised his pistol, his heart pounding in his chest. One of the figures stepped forward, his voice a raspy growl. "The conduit. It awakens, the ancient power. It calls to us." He fixed his gaze on Aurora. "Join us, child. Your connection, it is vital." Anthony stepped in front of Aurora, shielding her with his body. "I won't let you use her." The figure snarled, raising his weapon. "Then you will die." The chamber erupted in a cacophony of energy fire. The first blast of energy sizzled past Anthony's ear, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt metal. Primitive but potent. The Separatists' energy weapons, jury-rigged and unstable, spat bolts of raw power. The conduit's energy amplifying their effectiveness, far beyond what their crude construction should allow. Anthony ducked behind a crumbling section of the outpost wall, the stone offering meager protection against the erratic energy streams. He raised his own energy pistol, the familiar weight grounding him amidst the chaos. He sighted down the barrel, focusing on the nearest separatist, a hulking figure with bulging veins pulsing with sickly green light, and fired. Not to kill, but to disable. A precise shot to the weapon's power cell sent the device sputtering and smoking, rendering it useless. "Stay behind me, Aurora," he shouted, his voice barely audible above the din. He risked a glance back. Aurora huddled against the wall, her large eyes wide with fear. "Aurora!" A voice boomed from the shadows. It was the leader, his form even more grotesque than the others, the conduit's energy warping his features into a caricature of Eleni physiology. "You are the chosen one. The one who will unlock the conduit's true power." Anthony frowned. What was he talking about? "The conduit," the leader continued, stepping into the flickering light, "is a gift from our ancestors. An ancient technology abandoned by the High Council because they feared its potential." He spat the words High Council like a curse. It was designed to amplify psychic abilities to heal and to protect, but they suppressed it, fearing its power. He gestured to his mutated followers. We are the children of the conduit. We have embraced its energy even though it has changed us. It has given us strength, telepathy, abilities you cannot even imagine. He paused, his gaze intense. But it is also killing us. The mutations. They are accelerating. Only you, Aurora, can unlock the conduit's secrets and save us. A sudden surge of energy pulsed from the conduit, washing over Aurora. She gasped, her body rigid. Her eyes glazed over, unfocused. Aurora! Anthony reached for her, but she didn't respond. A vision flooded her mind, a panorama of ancient Eleni, their forms elegant and ethereal, gathered around a similar conduit. Some were healers, channeling its energy to mend the sick and wounded. Others were warriors, unleashing its power in devastating blasts of psychic force, obliterating their enemies. The vision shifted, showing the conduit being used for both creation and destruction, a tool of immense potential and terrible danger. Anthony, seeing Aurora's distress, grabbed her shoulders, shaking her gently. Aurora, snap out of it. It's not safe. He knew enough about energy conduits to understand the potential for overload, for irreversible damage to her mind. The separatist leader roared, shoving Anthony away. Don't interfere. She is fulfilling her destiny. She is unlocking the conduit's healing potential for our people. The separatists, energized by their leader's words, launched a coordinated attack. 3 of them surged forward, weapons raised, intent on capturing Aurora. Anthony knew he couldn't hold them off forever. He had to make a choice, protect Aurora or disable the conduit. Both seemed impossible, but as he looked at the separatists, at their desperate faces and mutated bodies, he saw something else. Not evil, but desperation. They weren't inherently malicious. They were driven by a misguided belief that the conduit was their only hope. An idea sparked in his mind, risky but potentially life-saving. Stop, he shouted, raising his hands. Wait, I can help you. The separatists paused, their weapons still trained on him. I understand what you're going through, Anthony continued, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. You're dying and you believe the conduit is the only way to save yourselves, but you're using it blindly. You don't understand its power. We understand enough, the leader snarled. It gives us strength, and it's killing you, Anthony countered. Look at yourselves, the mutations are getting worse, but maybe we can work together. I can study the conduit, analyze its energy signature. I can help you find a way to use its power safely without causing further mutations. The separatist leader stared at him, his expression a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. You, a human, what do you know of Eleni technology? Enough to know that you're playing with fire, Anthony said. But I also know a thing or two about energy fields, about genetic mutations, and I'm willing to help if you'll let me. Aurora, still recovering from her vision, stepped forward, her voice weak but firm. He's right. We can find a way. We can heal our people and restore balance to this outpost. The separatist leader hesitated, his eyes flicking between Anthony and Aurora. He clearly didn't trust Anthony, but he also couldn't dismiss the potential benefits of human scientific knowledge. Very well, he said finally, his voice permeated with suspicion. We will agree to a temporary truce, but know this, human, any sign of betrayal, any attempt to sabotage the conduit will be met with swift and brutal force. Anthony nodded. Understood. The truce was fragile, hanging by a thread of desperation and mutual need, but it was a start. Anthony and Aurora, accompanied by a contingent of wary separatists, began to analyze the conduit. They discovered hidden control panels, etched with ancient Eleni symbols, and recovered fragmented texts detailing its operation. The technology was far more complex than they had initially imagined. The energy signature. It's resonating with Aurora's unique genetic makeup, Anthony said, studying a holographic display. That's why she was able to access the vision. She has a natural connection to the conduit. A connection that could save us all, the separatist leader said, his voice filled with a desperate hope. We are dying, human. The mutations, they are accelerating. We need to control the conduit, to harness its power before it's too late. As Anthony delved deeper into the conduit's schematics, he discovered something disturbing, a fail-safe mechanism designed to shut down the device permanently if its energy became unstable. It was a last resort, a way to prevent the conduit from causing widespread destruction. But activating it would also mean destroying the separatists' only hope. He stared at the activation sequence, his finger hovering over the control panel. Should he do it? Should he sacrifice their lives to prevent a potential catastrophe? As he contemplated his decision, a new energy surge emanated from the conduit, stronger than anything they had felt before. The separatist leader cried out, clutching his head. His body convulsed, his mutations intensifying rapidly, his skin glowing with an eerie green light. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious. The remaining separatists turned to Anthony, their faces a mixture of fear and desperation. Save him, human. One of them pleaded. You have the knowledge, you have to save him. Anthony stared at the fallen leader, at the desperate faces of his followers, at the humming conduit, pulsing with dangerous energy. He had a choice to make, a choice that would determine the fate of the outpost, the future of the separatists, and perhaps even Aurora's destiny. He had to decide, and he had to decide now. Anthony's hands blurred, clamping a makeshift pressure bandage to the leader's chest. The air hissed from the wound, thick with an alien ichor that stained his gloves black. Damn it, he muttered, adjusting the flow of the nutrient solution dripping into the leader's arm. The man's exoskeleton, already brittle from the conduit's influence, cracked further with each shallow breath. He was fading fast. The monitors beeped a frantic counterpoint to the low hum of the outpost's life support, each blip a hammer blow against Anthony's hope. He slapped another sensor onto the leader's carapace, the cold metal a stark contrast to the feverish heat radiating from within. Too much, too fast. The mutations were accelerating, twisting the leader's biology into something unrecognizable. He glanced at Aurora. Her large, iridescent eyes were closed, her delicate antennae twitching. She was reaching out, trying to connect. He could see the strain etched on her face. When she opened her eyes, they were filled with a pain that wasn't her own. He believes, she whispered, her voice trembling. He believes in the conduit, he feels. Fear, but certainty. He would sacrifice everything for it. Anthony's gut twisted. The conduit wasn't just amplifying psychic abilities, it was feeding on them, twisting the leader's faith into a biological weapon. He ran a diagnostic scan, the results confirming his worst fears. The conduit's energy signature was interwoven with the leader's DNA, accelerating the mutation process. We have to disconnect him, Anthony said, his voice tight. The conduit is killing him. It's amplifying the mutations, accelerating his organ failure. A chorus of angry protests erupted from the gathered separatists, their faces, etched with desperation and fear, hardened with defiance. No, you can't. The conduit is our only hope. It's the source of our power. One of them shouted. Your hope is killing him, Anthony countered, his voice rising above the din. Look at him. The conduit is tearing him apart. Disconnecting him is the only chance he has, however slim, to survive. Continuing like this guarantees his death and possibly yours as well as this mutation spreads. He swept his hand to the failing monitors, the flickering lights, the cracked walls. Is this the power you want? He saw the doubt flicker in their eyes, but fear still held them captive. The leader, even in his ravaged state, was a symbol of their resistance, their connection to something greater. Aurora stepped forward, her small frame radiating an unexpected strength. He is right, she said, her voice clear and firm. I have felt his pain. The conduit is not healing him. It is co-doctoring him. We must trust Dr. Taylor. He wants to help us. Her words, permeated with the weight of her own suffering and her unwavering belief in Anthony, cut through the tension. The separatists, their faces etched with grief and resignation, slowly nodded. "Do it," the largest of them growled, his voice heavy with despair. "But if he dies, you will answer to us." Anthony swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He adjusted the settings on the conduit's neural interface, his hands trembling slightly. "I understand. I'll do everything I can." He took a breath, steeling himself. "Aurora, stand back." With a final glance at the dying leader, Anthony severed the connection. A blinding surge of energy erupted from the conduit, throwing him back against the wall. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the outpost into darkness. Emergency lights sputtered to life, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The monitors went blank. "What happened?" Aurora cried, scrambling to her feet. "I don't know," Anthony said, his ears ringing. "System-wide power failure." He grabbed a flashlight and raced towards the conduit's control room, Aurora close behind. The room was a chaos of sparking wires and shattered consoles. The air crackled with residual energy. He swept the flashlight across the walls, illuminating a series of ancient Eleni glyphs etched into the metal. "What does it say?" "It's old," Aurora said, her eyes wide with shock. "Very old, this. This isn't just a conduit." She ran a hand over the glyphs, her fingers tracing the ancient symbols. "It's a weapon of mass destruction." Anthony's blood ran cold. He focused the flashlight on a large, circular panel in the center of the room. The panel was covered in intricate patterns, each line pulsing with a faint, ethereal light. "It requires a genetic key," Aurora whispered, her voice barely audible. "A specific sequence, and I think I have it." She looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. "My mutation, it's not just a weakness, it's the key." "The Eleni abandoned it," Anthony said, his mind racing. "That's why it was hidden here. They couldn't control it. The ethical implications." It was too much. Aurora stared at the panel, her face a mask of anguish. "But if I could control it, I could save my people, I could end the war." "At what cost, Aurora?" Anthony asked, his voice gentle but firm. "This is a weapon of mass destruction. Using it, it would be a genocide." As they argued, a piercing alarm blared through the outpost. Red lights flashed, casting the room in an even more ominous glow. "Incoming vessel," a separatist shouted over the comm system. "Unidentified warship approaching. They're locking onto our energy signature." "They're here for the conduit," another voice crackled. "They must have sensed the power surge." Anthony felt a cold dread grip his heart. Or they sensed Aurora when she activated the dormant system. They were likely already looking for this place, and she led them straight to it. On the main screen, a warship appeared, its silhouette menacing against the star-strewn sky. A figure appeared on the screen. "Eleni, you are harboring a weapon that belongs to me. I am here to take what is mine and destroy this outpost." The fleet leader was an old enemy of the Eleni. Anthony looked at Aurora, her face a battleground of conflicting emotions. They had a choice to make: unleash the conduit's destructive power, or find another way to protect the separatists from the incoming threat. The fate of the outpost, and perhaps the entire galaxy, hung in the balance. The harsh crackle of a priority channel shattered the tense silence. "Unidentified vessel, this is the warship Indomitable. You are harboring a fugitive, Aurora of the Eleni High Council, and possessing unauthorized conduit technology. Surrender both immediately, and we guarantee leniency. Refusal will be met with extreme prejudice." Anthony, already hunched over a salvaged console, his fingers flying across the makeshift keyboard, barely glanced up. "Leniency my ass," he muttered. The warship schematics flickered across the screen: weapon arrays, shield matrices, propulsion systems. Their shields are standard-issue Corvan plating, but their weapon loadout: plasma cannons, disruptor missiles, and a phase shift projector. "We're outgunned by a factor of 10. He spat. "Minimum." Inside the command center, the separatists were a chaotic mess of panicked chirps and frantic gestures. Elder Thalon, his carapace trembling, shrilled, We must surrender her. We cannot withstand their firepower. But Krell, a younger, more militant Eleni, smacked his fist on a nearby console. Never. We will fight for our freedom. Aurora, her large, iridescent eyes wide with a mixture of fear and persistence, slipped away from the arguing crowd. She moved with a newfound willpower towards the conduit control room, a chamber filled with the hum of ancient technology and the faint scent of ozone. Here, amongst the towering consoles covered in intricate glyphs, were the texts and instructions on the weapon. Anthony, noticing her departure, pushed himself away from the console and hurried after her. Aurora, wait! He found her standing before a massive, crystalline structure, her delicate hands hovering over its surface. Don't do this, he pleaded, his voice tight with urgency. Using that thing, it'll make us no better than them, it'll just perpetuate the cycle. Aurora turned, her eyes filled with a sorrow that belied her youth. We have no choice, Doctor. They will slaughter us all if we don't defend ourselves. They care nothing for leniency, only the end result. She gestured to the wall of ancient texts. It can be calibrated for surgical strikes. Minimal collateral damage, but it requires specific sequences. Sequences I barely understand. Anthony chewed on his lip, his mind racing. Okay, surgical strikes. That's something, but we need time. I can rig up some modifications to their existing defenses, create a diversion, maybe buy us a few precious minutes. He turned and started back towards the command center, his mind already formulating a plan. But as he left the room, a low hiss echoed behind him. A small faction of separatists, their faces grim and determined, blocked his path. One of them, a hulking Eleni with scarred carapace, stepped forward. The girl belongs to us. We will activate the weapon with or without her consent. Anthony braced himself. You won't touch her. He lunged, catching the lead separatist off guard with a swift kick to the leg joint. The Eleni crumpled, hissing in pain. Anthony spun, delivering a sharp elbow to the throat of another, sending him staggering backward. He was fast, resourceful, but they were too many. The separatists swarmed him, their chitinous limbs flailing. He managed to parry a few blows, but a sharp claw raked across his arm, drawing blood. He was quickly overwhelmed, pinned against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Aurora, witnessing the brutal assault, felt a surge of anger and drive. She would not let Anthony sacrifice himself for her. She would use the conduit, but only as a last resort, only when all other options had failed. Back in the command center, Anthony, despite his injuries, was already barking orders into a comm unit. Krell, reroute power from the life support systems to the old plasma turrets. Thalen, activate the decoy emitters. Now, he was a whirlwind of activity, his knowledge of the warship systems allowing him to exploit vulnerabilities that the Eleni had overlooked. I'm going to give them a surprise they won't soon forget. He rerouted power and launched a surprise attack, disabling its shields temporarily. The warship Indomitable responded with swift and brutal efficiency. A barrage of disruptor missiles slammed into the outpost, tearing through the outer defenses like paper. Explosions rocked the structure, sending tremors through the floor. Aurora, seeing the devastation on the monitor screens, her people dying because of her, reached out towards the conduit's control panel. Her fingers trembled as she prepared to input the activation sequence. But she hesitated, her conscience warring with her duty. Another hail, this one even more menacing than the last, blared through the comm system. This is your final warning. Surrender Aurora of the High Council or face complete annihilation. You have 60 seconds. Aurora closed her eyes, her decision made. She would not unleash the conduit's destructive power. Not yet. Instead, she focused her mental energy, reaching out with her unique abilities, and overloaded the warship's communication systems with a surge of chaotic static. The hail cut off abruptly. Anthony, wiping blood from his brow, staggered back into the control room. That'll buy us some time, he said, his voice hoarse. But their shields will be back online in approximately 30 minutes. He looked at Aurora, his eyes filled with a fierce dedication. "We need a new plan." His gaze drifted towards the stolen ship. He paused. "We can try and repair our stolen ship and use it to escape while the Separatists fight as a distraction." The hangar bay doors hissed shut behind them, sealing them inside the cavernous space with the battered Alini transport. Dust motes danced in the emergency lighting, illuminating the ship's scarred hull and sparking wires dangling from ripped panels. The air smelled of ozone and burnt metal. Anthony ran a gloved hand along a gash in the ship's flank, the metal edges sharp and unforgiving. "Hyperdrive shot to hell," he muttered, his voice echoing in the vast space. "Navigation's almost as bad. Looks like they were planning on this being a one-way trip." Flickering lights cast long shadows, emphasizing the daunting task ahead. Aurora stood beside him, her large, iridescent eyes reflecting the flickering lights. She didn't speak for a moment then. "We can't just leave them, Anthony, the Separatists. They're fighting for their freedom." Her voice was soft but firm. Anthony turned, his face grim. "Aurora, we can barely keep ourselves alive. We can't save everyone. Our priority is getting out of here." He knew it sounded harsh, but practicality had to win out. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the pull between self-preservation and compassion. A distant rumble shook the hangar, followed by the staccato bursts of energy weapons fire. The Separatists had launched their counterattack, a desperate, futile gesture to buy them time. Outside, chaos reigned. "They won't last long," Anthony said, his voice tight. "We need to move." He grabbed a plasma cutter from a nearby workbench, its handle worn smooth with use. "Let's see what we can salvage." He moved with a focused energy, driven by the urgency of their situation. He moved like a man with a purpose, scavenging parts from the wreckage of other damaged vehicles scattered around the hangar. A power conduit here, a damaged sensor array there. He worked quickly, his mind already piecing together the puzzle of the ship's systems. He produced a multi-tool from his belt and began jury-rigging a human-compatible interface for the ship's navigation system. Sparks flew as he spliced wires, the smell of ozone filling the air. The old tech was slow and clunky, but it was their only hope. Aurora, meanwhile, was attempting to reroute power to the hyperdrive. She traced the flow of energy with her slender fingers, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The energy regulator. It's fused," she said, her voice imbued with frustration. "It's beyond repair." Anthony paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Damn it." He thought for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the hangar. "Wait. I remember seeing something similar on those old human mining drones. Back on. Well, never mind. It might be a long shot, but if we can adapt it." Aurora's eyes widened. "You think you can reprogram a human regulator to work with an Alini hyperdrive?" "I don't think I know we can try," Anthony said, a spark of commitment in his voice. "It won't be perfect. It'll reduce our range, maybe even make the jump unstable, but it's better than nothing." Working together, they managed to extract the regulator from the drone wreckage. Aurora, with her innate understanding of Alini technology, was able to reprogram it, adapting its function to the hyperdrive's needs. But as Anthony had predicted, it was a compromise. The hyperdrive was now only capable of short-range jumps, and even those were potentially dangerous. Another, closer explosion rocked the hangar. Dust rained down from the ceiling and the lights flickered violently. The warship was closing in. Structural damage was beginning to appear in the support beams. "We don't have much time," Anthony said, his voice grim. "We can risk a jump blind to who knows where, or we can stay and fight alongside the Separatists, which means certain death." Just then, a series of beeps emanated from the ship's control panel. Anthony rushed over, his fingers flying across the damaged console. "The comm system. It's partially recovered." He patched into the garbled signal, his face etched with concentration. A distorted voice crackled through the speakers. "Alini, colony, nearby, within, range, request, assistance." The signal faded in and out, but the message was clear. There was a nearby Eleni colony, close enough for their jury-rigged hyperdrive to reach. Aurora stared at him, her expression a mix of hope and despair. A colony. But what about the separatists? Anthony met her gaze, his own filled with a mixture of drive and regret. We can't abandon a chance for help, Aurora. If we can reach the colony, we can get reinforcements, supplies, maybe even turn the tide. Aurora hesitated for a long moment, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Okay. We try the jump. The ship groaned as Aurora initiated the power-up sequence. Warning lights flashed and the air crackled with energy. Outside, the sounds of battle grew louder, closer. The warship was almost upon them. Anthony worked feverishly at the comm panel, his fingers dancing across the damaged controls. He sent out a coded message to the separatists, a promise whispered into the void. We're coming back, with help, if we can. With a final surge of power, the stolen ship shuddered, the hyperdrive emitters glowed, and the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of light. They were gone, leaving the besieged outpost behind, the warship's wrath descending upon the brave souls who had bought them this desperate chance. The warship, not to be outdone, accelerated to pursue the stolen ship. The chase was on. The stars snapped into existence, the familiar streaking lines of hyperspace dissolving into a field of cold, distant lights. The ship shuddered violently as it reverted to real space, alarms blaring in Anthony's ears. They were on the edge of the Eleni colony's territory. Aurora gripped the arms of her seat, her large, iridescent eyes wide. We're here, she breathed, a fragile hope flickering in her voice, quickly shadowed by a deep-seated anxiety. Do you think they will accept us? Anthony glanced at the damage reports flashing across the console. Acceptance is the least of our problems right now, Aurora. He gestured to the readings. The ship took a beating, hull breaches, multiple system failures, and we're leaking radiation, badly. He was already moving, strapping himself into a repair harness and grabbing a plasma welder. I need to seal those breaches before we all start glowing in the dark. Keep an eye on the sensors. While Anthony worked, the metallic tang of burning circuits filling the air, Aurora focused on the comm panel. Her slender, multi-jointed fingers danced across the controls, initiating a distress signal. This is Aurora of the house. She paused, a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Of the separatist collective requesting assistance. We are under attack and require immediate refuge. Our identification code is. A moment of static, then a response, cold and clipped. Unidentified vessel, this is Eleni Colony Control. You are approaching restricted space. Identify yourselves and state your purpose. The voice dripped with suspicion. Aurora swallowed, forcing herself to remain calm. We are refugees from the separatist outpost, attacked by a warship loyal to the High Council. We are seeking asylum and medical assistance. We are not combatants. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. Finally, the voice returned, infused with reluctance. We are aware of the situation at the outpost. The Eleni colony maintains a strict neutrality agreement. We cannot become involved in your conflict. But there are wounded dying. Aurora pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. The warship is pursuing us. If you don't help, they will destroy us all and violate your neutrality anyway. Another agonizing pause. Then, a sigh heavy with resignation. Very well, we will grant you temporary refuge. But understand this, we offer no military support, no resources beyond basic necessities. You enter at your own risk. Thank you, Aurora whispered, relief washing over her. Thank you. Anthony, sweat beading on his forehead as he wrestled with a damaged conduit, looked up. Temporary refuge is better than none. But get ready, kid, this could get bumpy. He took the controls, guiding the crippled ship through a field of debris, the shattered remains of other vessels, glittering like deadly confetti. The colony's defense platforms, sleek and menacing, loomed in the distance. The ship lurched violently as it limped towards a designated landing zone, a stark concrete pad surrounded by armed Eleni security forces. Their exoskeletons gleamed under the harsh floodlights, their weapons trained on the approaching vessel. The moment the ramp lowered, they were surrounded. The Eleni soldiers, their faces hidden behind visors, escorted Anthony and Aurora to a sterile, white-walled quarantine facility. Medical examinations were swift and impersonal. As Aurora waited, a high-ranking Eleni official approached. She recognized him instantly, Counselor Valerius, an old family friend, though his expression was distant, almost apologetic. "Aurora," he said, his voice cool, "it has been a long time." "Counselor Valerius," Aurora replied, a knot forming in her stomach. "Thank you for allowing us to land. The situation here is complicated," Valerius said, his gaze flickering around the room as if afraid of being overheard. "The colony is struggling. Internal dissent, dwindling resources." Anthony, overhearing the conversation, accessed the colony's public networks. What he found painted a grim picture. A strict embargo imposed by other Eleni factions, crippling shortages of food, medicine, and vital supplies. Aurora watched as a group of colonists shuffled past, their exoskeletons dull and cracked, their movements slow and listless. The weight of their suffering settled heavily on her shoulders, reinforcing her drive to help the separatists, even if this colony couldn't. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed. Valerius's expression hardened. "Sensors indicate a warship has entered our territory," he announced, his voice tight. "They have violated our neutrality." The ground trembled as the colony's defense systems powered up, energy weapons charging. Valerius turned to Aurora, his eyes filled with a cold resignation. "They have demanded your surrender, to maintain peace, to protect the colony. We have no choice. We will hand you over." He paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Accept your fate, Aurora. It is the only way." Aurora's iridescent eyes, usually shimmering with a youthful spark, were now clouded with disbelief. You can't be serious. After everything I've done for this colony, you're just handing me over." Her voice, normally a melodic chime, trembled with a raw, guttural edge. The Eleni official, a tall, slender figure with chitinous armor polished to a mirror sheen, shifted uncomfortably. "Aurora, please understand," the official said, her voice a carefully modulated hum. "This is not a decision we've taken lightly, but the warship approaching. It represents a force we cannot withstand. Our priority must be the survival of the colony." Aurora took a step closer, her weakened exoskeleton creaking softly. "But what about our values? What about the ideals we swore to uphold? We promised to protect the innocent, to stand against oppression." The official sighed, a faint hiss escaping her respiratory vents. "Ideals are a luxury we can no longer afford. Besides, Aurora, there's more to it than you know. The colony's resources, they're being monopolized. The leading council, they hoard the nutrient paste, the atmospheric scrubbers, everything. Your sacrifice, as difficult as it is, will force them to redistribute those resources more efficiently. It's the only way to ensure everyone survives." Unseen, unheard, Anthony stood at the edge of the corridor, his human ears picking up every word. His brow furrowed. This wasn't just about fear. It was about power, control, and the ruthless calculus of survival. He felt a familiar surge of anger, a protective instinct seeking in. He couldn't let them do this. He retreated silently, his mind already racing, mapping out the colony's layout, assessing their options. They couldn't rely on anyone here. He found Aurora slumped against a wall, her shoulders shaking. "They're going to hand me over, Anthony, like I'm some kind of bargaining chip." Anthony knelt beside her, his hand gently touching her arm. "Aurora, listen to me. We can't trust them. We have to get out of here. We have to warn the separatists." Aurora looked up, her eyes filled with despair. "But how? They'll be watching us. We're trapped." "Not yet," Anthony said, his voice firm. "We're resourceful. We're going to find a way. We have to." He saw a flicker of tenacity ignite within her, a spark refusing to be extinguished. Aurora straightened, her delicate mandibles clicking softly. "You're right. I won't let them decide my fate. I won't let them sacrifice the separatists." Anthony nodded. "Good. Now I need your help. Do you know anything about the colony's security? Any weaknesses?" Aurora closed her eyes for a moment, accessing her internal databanks. "There's an access point near the landing zone. It's used for maintenance, but it's poorly guarded. The security cameras are often offline." "Perfect," Anthony said. "That's our way out." He paused, thinking. "We'll use the damaged ship as a distraction. Set off the emergency beacon, create a diversion." He moved to the storage room that housed the ship's communication system, a jumbled mess of wires and broken components. He began to work with practiced efficiency, his fingers dancing across the damaged circuits. He managed to repair a small section of the system, enough to send a short, coded message. Meanwhile, Aurora, despite her weakened state, was contacting her network of informants within the colony, gathering information about the warship's expected arrival time and patrol routes. Her connections were still loyal, or at least fearful enough to obey her requests. As they worked, a shadow fell across the doorway. The Eleni official stood there, her expression unreadable. "I know what you're planning," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't condone it, but I can't let you walk into a trap unarmed." She produced a small pouch filled with medical supplies and a few basic tools. "Take these and be careful if anyone finds out I helped you." "We understand," Anthony said, accepting the pouch. "Thank you." The official nodded curtly and disappeared back into the shadows. With the plan in place, they moved swiftly and silently through the colony's corridors, sticking to the shadows, avoiding the patrols of heavily armed security guards. The air hung thick with tension, the hum of the colony's machinery a constant reminder of their confinement. They reached the landing zone, the damaged ship looming before them like a wounded beast. Anthony activated the emergency beacon, a piercing shriek that echoed through the colony. Red lights flashed, alarms blared, and the heavy thud of armored boots grew closer. As the security forces converged on the ship, Anthony and Aurora slipped through the unguarded access point, a narrow, dimly lit tunnel that reeked of stale nutrient paste and ozone. Inside, they were met by a small group of colonists, their faces etched with worry. "You're here," one of them whispered, relief flooding his features. "We heard the beacon. The separatists sent ships out to rescue you. They knew this would happen." The colonists led them through a maze of tunnels to a hidden hangar bay where a small, outdated shuttle sat bathed in the pale light of emergency lamps. "The rally point is designated as Kepler 186F, coordinates 45, 2N87, 1W. Good luck." As they prepared to launch the shuttle, a dark shadow fell across the hangar. The warship had arrived, its massive bulk blotting out the stars. Over the colony's comms, the Eleni official's voice, infused with false sorrow, echoed. "Separatist vessels, stand down. Aurora has succumbed to her illness. There is no need for further bloodshed." Anthony ignored the transmission, firing up the shuttle's ancient engines. The power cells flickered, sputtered, and finally caught, bathing the hangar in an unsteady blue glow. Just as the warship began deploying boarding parties, Anthony slammed the launch button. The shuttle lurched forward, its engines straining, struggling to gain altitude. Outside, the warship's weapon systems locked on, targeting the fleeing shuttle. The small vessel bucked violently as the first energy bolt streaked past, searing the air around them. The shuttle bucked violently, alarms blaring a discordant symphony of warning. Red lights strobed across the cockpit, painting Anthony's face in alternating flashes of crimson and shadow. A glancing blow, but enough. "What was that?" he yelled over the din, wrestling with the controls. "Weapon fire," Aurora replied, her voice strained. She gripped the console, her iridescent eyes wide. "From the warship, they found us." The shuttle vibrated, a low-frequency thrum that resonated in Anthony's teeth. Critical systems failing, he announced grimly, reading the diagnostics. Inertial dampeners are going. We're about to be torn apart. The internal gravity fluctuated, throwing him against his harness. Aurora's slender fingers danced across a damaged panel. I recognize the Alini engineering. There's a bypass. It might stabilize the system, but it's risky. It could overload the engines. Anthony glanced at her, weighing the options. Torn apart by inertial stress or stranded with fried engines. What's the risk? Unpredictable energy surges. We're rerouting power directly. The engines weren't designed for this. She hesitated. It's dangerous. So is dying, Anthony countered, his hands already moving to access the necessary panels. Guide me. I'll adapt the human tools. He pulled out a multi-tool, its familiar weight comforting in the chaos. He trusted his hands, his ability to improvise. Tell me where to connect what. With Aurora's precise instructions, Anthony worked quickly, splicing wires and bypassing damaged circuits. Sparks flew, the smell of ozone filling the cramped cockpit. He used a human-made micro-welder to seal a connection, his brow furrowed in concentration. The shaking lessened. The alarm subsided to a manageable drone. Dampeners are stabilizing, Aurora reported, relief evident in her voice. But engine temperature is spiking. We're losing speed, maneuverability. As if on cue, a squadron of sleek, angular fighters appeared on the forward view screen, engaging the warship. Laser fire streaked across the void, illuminating the dance of death. A voice crackled over the comms, clear despite the interference. Unidentified shuttle, this is Commander Rylan of the Separatist Fleet. We received your coded message, Dr. Taylor. Stand by to receive coordinates for rendezvous. Anthony stared at the screen, surprised. Separatists, they're risking themselves for us. They need me, Doctor, Aurora said softly. More than you know. The Separatist leader continued, we'll provide escort. Proceed to designated coordinates. Asteroid Base Cathar. We're counting on you. The shuttle, now escorted by the nimble fighters, limped towards the rendezvous point, a remote asteroid barely visible against the starfield. The engines whined in protest, threatening to give out at any moment. During the journey, Anthony tended to Aurora's injuries. A gash on her arm oozed luminescent blue blood. Hold still, he murmured, applying a bio-bandage. This will sting. Thank you, Doctor, she said, her voice tinged with gratitude, for everything. Just doing what I can, he replied, but it was more than that. He felt a connection to this alien child, a responsibility he hadn't anticipated. The warship. It's not just after me, Aurora explained, her brow furrowed in concern. They're targeting a research facility, a key one, vital to the Separatist cause. Research facility, Anthony prompted. It holds the key to producing advanced shielding technology that could protect our colonies from Alini attacks. Without it. She trailed off, her expression grim. We're doomed. Anthony absorbed the information. The Separatists were outgunned, outmatched. The loss of the research facility would cripple them. He suddenly understood the stakes were far higher than he initially realized. They arrived at the asteroid base to find it under attack. Smaller Alini ships, launched from the warship, were strafing the surface, laser fire ripping through the defenses. Separatist fighters, outgunned but determined, desperately tried to fend off the assault. They're closing in on the main hangar, Aurora exclaimed, pointing to the view screen. If they take that out, we're finished. Anthony stared at the chaos, his mind racing. Should they stay and defend the base, risking their lives, or continue on their original mission, leaving the Separatists to their fate? Then he saw it, an opportunity. Aurora, he said, his voice tight with willpower. Those engines, they're damaged, overheating, but maybe we can use that. Use them how? She asked, confused. As a weapon. Initiate an overload sequence. Set the shuttle on a collision course. Aurora's eyes widened. You'd sacrifice the shuttle. It's already half dead, Anthony pointed out. And it's the only thing that can reach those ships in time. Aurora hesitated, then nodded. I can help with the engine overload. but we only have a few minutes before the explosion. Working together, they rerouted power, bypassed safety protocols, and initiated the overload sequence. Alarms wailed, the shuttle shuddering violently. A timer flashed on the console, 0500. Set the course, Anthony said grimly, his hand steady on the controls. Collision course with the attacking ships. With the shuttle locked on its deadly trajectory, they scrambled into a small escape pod. The timer ticked down, 0030. Brace yourself, Anthony said, activating the launch sequence. The pod ejected, rocketing away from the shuttle just as the engines reached critical mass. A blinding flash engulfed the attacking Aleni ships, followed by a deafening roar. The enemy strike force was obliterated, but the explosion had undoubtedly alerted the warship to their presence. They were now truly exposed. The escape pod shuddered as it locked into the docking clamps of a battered Separatist patrol ship. Relief washed over Anthony, quickly followed by concern for Aurora, who clung to his arm. The hatch hissed open, revealing a gruff-looking Aleni Separatist, his carapace scarred and his antennae twitching nervously. He ushered them inside. "Commander wants to see you both," the Separatist grunted, leading them through the cramped corridors. The Separatist commander, a veteran named Thalon, stood before a holographic display showing a massive warship eclipsing a nearby asteroid. "Dr. Taylor," Thalon said, his voice grim, "that warship belongs to the Aleni loyalists. They know we're harboring you and the patient. They're preparing to bombard this base. We have hours, maybe less." Anthony felt a cold dread creep into his heart. He looked at Aurora, her large eyes wide with fear. "There has to be something we can do," he said, his mind racing. "There is," Anthony declared, an idea forming rapidly. "We can use a modified version of the CRISPR technology, combined with what we've learned about Aleni biology from treating Aurora, to disrupt their targeting systems." Thalon stared at him, skeptical. "Disrupt a warship's targeting system with gene editing? Doctor, with all due respect, that sounds insane." "It's our only chance," Anthony countered, his voice firm. "Aurora understands the intricacies of Aleni biology better than anyone. We can adapt the CRISPR system to target specific components of their shield generator, a bioengineered weakness, perhaps." Aurora, seeing the hope in Anthony's eyes, nodded. "The shield harmonics. They resonate at a specific frequency tied to chitin production. If we can disrupt that." Working feverishly in the cramped lab, Anthony and Aurora became a blur of motion. Anthony, guided by Aurora's encyclopedic knowledge of Aleni physiology, repurposed the CRISPR system. He tweaked the targeting sequences, adapting them to disrupt the specific chitin-regulating enzymes within the warship's shield generators. Aurora, despite her weakened state, contributed invaluable insights, guiding Anthony through the complexities of Aleni bioengineering. "The frequency modulator needs to be recalibrated," Aurora said, her voice clear and confident. "Adjust the phase variance by 0.7 degrees. Anthony, trusting her implicitly, made the adjustment. "Almost ready," he muttered, sweat dripping from his brow. "Just need to load the payload." The Separatist fighters, a squadron of battered but agile interceptors, prepared for launch. Each fighter carried a modified CRISPR system, now a weaponized payload designed to exploit a vulnerability in the warship's defenses. "Remember," Thalon's voice crackled over the comms, "focus on the shield generators, disrupt their harmonics, and trust the doctor's science." The fighters launched, streaking towards the warship. The battle was short, brutal, and precise. The Separatist pilots, guided by Anthony's data and Aurora's insights, flew with a newfound purpose. They weaved through the warship's defenses, targeting the shield generators with pinpoint accuracy. The CRISPR systems detonated, releasing their genetically engineered payload. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The warship's shields flickered, sputtered, and then began to collapse. Alarms blared within the warship as its targeting systems went haywire. unable to lock onto the separatist fighters. "The harmonics are disrupted," Aurora exclaimed, monitoring the warship's energy signature. "They can't maintain a stable shield." "Now," Anthony yelled, his voice filled with adrenaline, "exploit the vulnerability, disable their weapons systems." Aurora, her eyes shining with purpose, guided the separatist fighters. She identified critical systems, pinpointing weaknesses in the warship's design. The fighters, following her instructions, unleashed a barrage of precisely targeted fire, disabling the warship's weapons and communications arrays without causing catastrophic damage. Crippled and unable to fulfill its mission, the warship limped away from the asteroid base, its shields down and its weapons silent. The separatist fighters returned to the base, hailed as heroes. News of Anthony's actions and Aurora's recovery spread like wildfire, reaching even the ears of the Eleni High Council. Public opinion shifted dramatically. The image of a human doctor saving an Eleni child and then helping to defend a separatist base resonated deeply with a war-weary population. Days later, a sleek, silver shuttle landed at the asteroid base. A delegation from the Eleni High Council, led by a stern-faced but clearly impressed elder, disembarked. They requested a meeting with Anthony and Aurora. In a makeshift conference room, Anthony stood before the Eleni High Council. Aurora sat beside him, her presence a powerful symbol of hope and reconciliation. "Dr. Taylor," the elder said, his voice respectful, "we came to thank you for saving Aurora's life, but more importantly, we came to understand how this genetic engineering affected Aurora to begin with." Anthony presented the evidence he had gathered, the genetic engineering practices that had led to Aurora's condition. He spoke passionately about the need for reform and greater transparency, advocating for ethical guidelines and independent oversight. "These practices," Anthony said, his voice ringing with conviction, "are not only dangerous, they are morally reprehensible. We must ensure that they never harm another being, Eleni or human." The Eleni High Council listened intently. They were impressed not only by Anthony's ingenuity, but also by his compassion and his unwavering commitment to ethical principles. "Dr. Taylor," the elder said after a long silence, "we agree. We will investigate these genetic engineering practices and implement reforms. We will ensure that such tragedies never happen again." Aurora, her voice filled with emotion, spoke next. "My experience has shown me that humans and Eleni can work together, learn from each other, and build a better future. We must bridge the gap between our species, foster understanding, and embrace our shared humanity." Inspired by Anthony's actions and Aurora's words, the Eleni High Council pledged to strengthen ties with humanity, fostering collaboration in medicine, science, and technology. Anthony and Aurora, their mission accomplished, decided to stay on the asteroid base. They continued their research, providing medical care to those in need, creating a haven for scientific progress and interspecies cooperation. Years later, under a canopy of stars, Anthony and Aurora stood side by side, gazing out at the vast expanse of the galaxy. "Do you think we made a difference?" Aurora asked, her voice soft. Anthony smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We did more than make a difference, Aurora. We showed them what's possible. We showed them that even the smallest act of kindness, the most improbable alliance, can change the course of history." He looked up at the stars, his eyes filled with hope. A future where humans and Eleni and all the races of the galaxy work together to build a better tomorrow. It's not just a dream anymore, Aurora. It's a promise.